Hello, class, and welcome to a new unit of physics. And this is unit 2.3. And in this unit, we're going to talk about the transfer of thermal energy. So, thermal energy, as you know, is another word for heat energy. And in this unit, we're going to look at how thermal energy goes from one place to another, how it transfers, in other words. In this first part, we're going to look at the first method of transfer for thermal energy, and that is called conduction. So, how does heat energy move? So, hot objects have heat energy, or otherwise known as thermal energy, and heat energy always moves from something hot to something cold. And there's no such thing as cold energy. So, an object gets colder because heat energy is moving away from it. There are three ways in which heat energy can move or can transfer. One is by conduction, the second method is by convection, and lastly by radiation. And we're going to look at each one of this in this unit. In this first part, we're going to look at conduction. So, what is conduction? Imagine you placing one end of an iron rod in fire, and then after a while, the other end will heat up. So you can see in this diagram here, in the beginning, this end will heat up first, and then you will see heat will travel, and then eventually the other end will become hot. So we say that heat has traveled from the hot end to the cooler end. So this animation here shows you how conduction works or how heat travels in this metal rod. So you can see in the beginning, the heat is here first, and then eventually the heat energy travels down until the whole metal rod has become hot. So how does conduction work? Atoms in a substance are always vibrating. If the substance gets hotter, the atoms have more energy and therefore they vibrate more. When one end of a hot when one end of a rod is heated, the atoms there gain energy and vibrate faster. These atoms bump with their less energetic neighbors, and some of their energy is transferred to these neighboring atoms, which in turn vibrates more. So you have an atom, the more energy you give it, the more it vibrates. And then when it's vibrating, it will hit its neighbor or the particles next to it or the molecules next to it. When it hits its neighbor, it passes on its energy to its neighbor. And then in turn, the neighbor becomes energetic and vibrates more. And then that neighbor will pass on the energy to its neighbor. And this thing goes on until it reaches the end of the object. So you can see it starts off from one end and then passes on to the next one, to the next one, next one, next one, next one, next one, until all of the particles or all the molecules become energetic, become hot, in other words. So in this way, heat energy is passed along the rod by the vibrating atoms. This transfer of energy from atom to atom continues until the cold end has the same temperature as the hot end. Bear in mind, during this process, the atoms do not move from its place. Now, because the metal rod is a solid, they do not move from their fixed place. They can only vibrate. So, conduction is the process by which heat energy is transmitted through collisions between neighboring molecules. So, they transfer heat by hitting or colliding with another molecule. That's how they give energy to another molecule. Solids are better at conducting heat energy than liquids and gases. This is because the molecules in solids are close together. If the atoms are too spaced out, it makes it harder for the atoms to pass the energy along. So if you imagine gases, it's going to take a while for the gas molecules to hit its neighboring atom or its neighboring molecule. So the process takes longer for gases and liquids because they are a bit far apart. But conduction is faster in solids. So, what are the key takeaways for part one of this unit? First thing, know that heat energy moves from somewhere hot to somewhere cold. And then there are three ways heat can move or heat can transfer from one place to another. The first way is conduction, The second way is convection, and the third way is radiation. And for conduction, conduction is the main way of heat transfer for solids. Conduction does happens in liquids and gases, but for liquids and gases, conduction is slower. So what is conduction? Conduction is the process by which heat energy is transmitted through collisions between neighboring molecules. So when particles become heated up, they vibrate more, and when they vibrate, they will collide with the neighboring particle, and the neighboring particle then has more heat energy, vibrates, and then collide with its neighbor, and so on. And this process goes on until the heat has reached the end of the object. In the next video lesson, we're going to look at conductors and insulators.